Michael Kaskey-Blomain, covers the 76ers in the NBA. All guests appear via the Boardwalk Honda hotline, and he joins us now here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. What's going on, MKB?
What's up, Mike? How you feeling?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad that this Brett Brown thing was quickly put to rest, that they didn't let it linger. I don't know if you completely believe what the Sixers were trying to say today, that he was told that he was safe, but regardless, he is back, and you think they did the right thing?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike, and I agree with you too. I'm glad they got it out of the way immediately. Within almost 24 hours of being eliminated, they allowed the speculation to fester, which was one thing, but at least they put an end to it quickly and allows the fans, the organization, the front office, everyone can now turn the page to the draft and free agency and building this team rather than having to concentrate on whether or not Brett would be here and then another coaching search.
Yeah. So first off, does it matter, number one, if they told him prior to the Toronto series, do you believe them when they said he was told and there was no question of whether he was coming back entering that series?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. Some of the details of the exact timeline could be maybe questionable, but the vibe that I had always gotten from the team, I think we had talked about this on the air, was that Brett was going to be back barring a complete collapse against the Nets or, the Heat or an inferior team in the first round. As long as this team, got back to the second round, looked formidable, was competitive. From what I had heard, he was coming back, and that wasn't a question. I think he was basically, obviously, what he said was under that same impression. I think it's obviously good. I don't think you should have your head coach kind of, up in the air when he's, trying to concentrate on bringing you to the Eastern Conference Finals. I don't think having to worry about if he's going to get canned the next day is, a good thing to have over his head. So I do think that he had, a bit of security going into that Toronto series, and I think that, the national story of him potentially losing his job was definitely overblown.
Yesterday, you were there, a lot of exit interviews, and there was a lot of support for the coach. Do you think that had, people – I know you're saying that, well, I think he was already told, but did that really put an exclamation point on it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Mike. I don't think it swayed them from they weren't going to fire him, and then they heard Joel and Jimmy, and then they changed their mind. But I think putting an exclamation mark on it is a good way to put it. Maybe that had something to do with the quick timing. Immediately after that, with the same evening of the exit interviews, they make that announcement after all these players came out. I think it would have just been a really bad look for the organization that's gone over, they've not been, a model of stability over the past half decade. And I think another change at the top would have looked bad for the organization in and of itself. And I think it would have looked obviously, really bad after you have your, not only, it's one thing if you have some peripheral guys like TJ McConnell coming out and saying, I really appreciate Brett for giving me an opportunity. This wasn't that. This was your star centerpiece player, Joel, coming out and throwing his support behind Brett. This is your second star that's known to have, some issues with coaches and organizations in the past, basically coming out and throwing his support behind Brett. And then JJ. I think those three guys obviously are very well respected, not only in the organization, but across the league. So if they all feel that way, I think it would be really difficult for the organization to then hear that and go in a different direction.
Brett didn't, or nobody would really answer the question of when you sat down, what definitively did they want you to work on and get better at? If you were talking to Brett, what is something, he's not perfect, let's be clear there. What are things that he still needs to work on going into year number 7?
Yeah, well, I think, one thing you'll hear a lot from the fans, at least, is, I guess, accountability, if you want to say that. They think that Brett kind of lets, Ben and Joel skate by when, kind of do what they want, which is not the truth. I mean, we've been around the organization. We know that, Brett holds these players accountable, but there's, certain levels to that. And I think in order for the Sixers team to take the step from being a really good, borderline contender like they've been the past couple of years to being a championship team, it's going to take, tough love and sacrifice on all of these guys' parts. He's going to have to get a little bit tougher on Ben than the approach that we've seen. I think with him being, kind of hands-off about the development of his jump shot. I think we're going to need to see him be a little bit more upfront with Ben. Same with Joel in terms of, his off-season conditioning and his physical conditioning and things like that. And otherwise, I think probably rotation issues. Brett has a tendency to juggle rotations and things like that. I think once they get a bench, and fulfill the roster out a little bit more, he'll have the job easier. But, overall, I don't think the organization sees glaring flaws, anywhere from Brett. There's small tweaks. I'm sure they'll look at some things on the defensive end, over the offseason now with Monty gone and Billy Lang gone, and these different, they'll have to fill in these different spots. And, I'm sure there'll be tweaks to the offensive approach depending on who they sign and whatnot. But overall, I think the style of play, the pace and space and defensive first approach is going to remain, and it's just going to be a matter of who they're able to fill in around Ben and Joel to run it back next year.
The team moving forward here only has 4 players signed. Now, one obstacle could be a lot of the people who would talk about Brett and would say, look, he had 3 different teams this year. That's not really fair to judge him. But if they don't get Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris and J.J. Redick back, you can make the argument that he's going to have another different team to go through next year.
Yeah, Mike, there's a big chance for a big roster turnover this year. There's basically, other than Ben and Joel, are really the only 2 rotation players from this playoff run that are definitely going to be back next year. You have Zaire, who you expect to play a larger role, and obviously Jonah Bolden could potentially maybe grow into a better reserve big than he's been. But I mean, this team has a ton of question marks. The bench in and of itself is going to be completely different, and then you have to think about what are the odds that they're able to bring even 2 out of the 3 of the other starters back in terms of Jimmy and Tobias. So I think for Brett, it's definitely going to be another summer or season of adjustment. But at least I think this year they're looking at it like he'll have the pieces in place going into the season. Hopefully it's not going to be, another 2 blockbuster trade year in the middle of the season. Next year they'll make these free agent, signings this summer. He'll have the pieces in training camp and can really, install the system and get these guys comfortable and familiar with each other, from the beginning of the season, which will, give them much more of a, timetable to work with than they had this year.
Let's start with a couple of things. Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the Sixers. Jimmy Butler. How confident are you that he's back?
Honestly, for me at this point, Mike, it's a coin toss. I know the organization would like to have him back. I think he does. I genuinely do think he enjoyed and enjoys being in Philly and enjoys, Joel and his teammates. But also, you don't know in terms of what he's really looking for. He was pretty vague when he was talking to us yesterday about what he wants. He kind of deferred to, the team of people around him, saying he wants to make sure that everyone, and their families are happy with the decision. Basically, he said it's more than a decision of just about him. His decision affects a lot of people. So that's kind of tough to read out. You don't know if he wants. There's been rumors that he wants to be, in a bigger market, that he might want to be the marquee guy somewhere rather than the second or third fiddle in Philly. So it could go either way to me. I think that they have a good chance. Obviously, they can offer him the most money. I think they'll go after him hard at midnight on July 1st. But, at the end of the day, what Jimmy really wants to do is, it's pretty much a mystery to me.
I kind of agree. I don't have a feeling on Jimmy Butler, and he seemed to like it here, but he's a very interesting guy. Does he want to be the man? Did he find out that he's maybe not the man? I know these guys' egos maybe don't let them say that to themselves, but, he obviously – look, he played well in the series, and he played okay in Game 7, but he certainly wasn't the man. The man was on the other side, and that's why they're advancing. If Jimmy was the man, they probably are playing, and we're not having this discussion. So maybe does he have that, come to Jesus moment of, hey, I'm not the man. I'm more of a secondary player. I'm very torn on that. How about Tobias Harris? I think there's so many more questions with him. Does he want to be the 4th guy? Does he think he can be the man? Is he happy with the role? He only took 4 shots in that Game 7 in the second half. I think he's a very interesting one. And the domino effects of losing him from that trade would be an epic failure.
Yeah, that's what makes it doubly tough, Mike, because if you end up losing Tobias for nothing, this offseason after just getting eliminated in the second round again, like you said, you lose the picks you traded, you lose Landry Shamet. it's a tough pill to swallow at that point. But it's another situation where, with Tobias, it's, he's going to command a lot of money on the open market, whether, it's in Philly or here. He has a solid skill set. He's at the age where he's probably about to come into his prime, 26, 27, 28. So, I mean, he's going to be in demand. And the question that the Sixers have to ask at that point is he the type of player that's going to be worth tying up major money into, for the next several years to complement Ben and Joel? If he's your third best player, is that a championship caliber team? And if he's your fourth best player, is that a salary that you're willing to pay your fourth best guy? Meaning you're going to have to pay three other players at least comparable money. So, I think we've all said all along that one or the other is likely to be back. It seems kind of doubtful that they'll both be back. I don't know specifically. If I had to guess, I would say that the priority would probably be Jimmy and then Tobias in terms of the pecking order for the Sixers front office. But, Brett had a lot of great things to say about Tobias Harris at his press conference this morning when he was asked about, kind of developing him in the offense. And, basically just stopped short of saying that he basically wants him back on the team. But he was talking about how his skill set's so malleable and he's so coachable and he can be used in so many different roles. And then he thinks that he can, even continue to grow his game considering that he's still only 26. So I think, both of those guys obviously are going to be targeted by a lot of teams, across the league. So I think the Sixers will, they'll have competition. And at the end of the day, it's just going to be, up to those guys to decide if they want to run it back or if they're interested in looking elsewhere.
If you had to pick one.
I think I would go with Jimmy, Mike. I think he just has a little bit more of the, I guess if you want to say star factor, or kind of the ability to take over a game. Tobias is almost like a super role player. Like he's a really, really, really good role player, but he falls short of that caliber of a star player that can really take over a game for stretches at a time. And I think in Philly specifically with Jimmy, like you and I have talked about before, it would be a situation for him where, he wouldn't have to carry the team on a nightly basis as he ages into his, early 30s. But he could kind of continue pick and choose his spots, continue in that closer role, and conserve his energy, so where he's not forced to give 30 every night like he might have to if he was the lead guy in say New York or Brooklyn or something like that. Here he could continue to be kind of the utility guy that the Sixers need to get buckets in the clutch time. So it would be basketball wise a great situation for him, and I think that would probably be the where I would lean.
J.J. Redick, interesting. I mean, I don't imagine him leaving the region. So like Knicks or Brooklyn or Philly, maybe he goes someplace else. But I don't see him at this stage of his career jetting too far away from this region here. So how possible is it that the Sixers can get him to come back? And maybe even, he got a ton of money 2 years ago. He took a ton less to come back. Can they convince him to come back for less than he got this year?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. I think that's a good point you said about the region. Obviously, he's stationed in Brooklyn with his family. He's old later into his career. He has kids. I think he, like you said, it seems less likely that he would be looking to go, somewhere across the country or anything like that. So I think that's an advantage. And like you said, I think we saw how emotional he was after the Sixers lost. We heard the things that he said about Joel, about Brett, about Ben. I think he's really, in the 2 years that he's been here, it's kind of represented the turnaround of this team. When he signed 2 summers ago, that's right when the team started building up. And I think he's really grown kind of a bond with the city that, obviously Brett, his teammates. So if it were up to him, I think his first choice would be to be back in Philly. I personally think his days as a starter are probably behind him. I think if he were to come back to the Sixers, it would have to be in a reserve role off the bench where he can still, get 20 plus minutes a game and get ample shots, but he can't be, I don't think he's the answer at the starting shooting guard spot anymore. So that's, I think, another factor that would play into it. But he did get, heavy contracts on 1-year deals the past 2 years. I think they were kind of front loaded with the thought that, down the line when that money had to be allocated elsewhere and JJ was still in the mix, that maybe he would take less. I think that's something he's kind of maybe not explicitly said, but referenced in the past. So I think that, the Sixers are probably his top choice, but he mentioned yesterday that he knows he's not necessarily, the top guy in the pecking order of free agency. So it's probably, his future will probably be tied to Jimmy, Tobias, and who else the Sixers are able to get in that top tier of guys first.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain is with us. Ben Simmons, I mean, yesterday he didn't seem too thrilled to be asked about his shot. Today Brett said, look, if he's 26 years old, which is 4 years from now, and we're still talking about this, yes, then we have a problem. Do you think it's a problem if next year he is the same player?
Yeah, I do think it's a problem, Mike. I mean, I get what Brett was saying. I think that, especially in Philly, the fans have been a little bit, hyper analytical when it comes to Brett or when it comes to Ben and his shot, and, kind of not paying attention to all the other things he contributes, but focusing on the shot. But with that being said, now when you're going into your third year, players in the league are really coming into their own at that point, developing, they're going to be who they are. And for the Sixers to take the next step, we've seen, all the ways that Ben can contribute to really unlock the combination of him and Joel for the both of them to be at their full potential. We know he has to be able to at least hit that elbow jumper. He knows that. He talked about it yesterday a little bit, I think. This summer, I expect that, there's no reason that should not be his primary, focus. All the other areas of his game, well, they certainly need improvement. They're all, very far ahead for his age and, where he's at in his career. But the shot is the one thing that should be, his A1 goal this summer. So I think if he comes back next year without the shot, not only won't it be great for the Sixers, I think it'll be, an issue kind of indicative of Ben maybe not putting in the work, which is, not something I expect. Ben's a hard worker. I think he'll figure it out, at least to the point where it's, formidable that he'll consider. He can't be to the point where he won't even consider shooting. That has to be the first step where you can at least, think about pulling up when they back off you a little bit.
I mean, shouldn't that be the number one? I mean, I'm not even a big proponent of like, hey, he's got to get a jump shot or he's a total failure. Like, I like what Ben said. It's not about where the shot is. It's about me being more aggressive, which, okay, then why aren't you more aggressive? But if you're going to work on something, he should be working on expanding his game. It seems like he's still a little defensive about people questioning that.
Yeah, I agree with that, Mike. I think, I don't know if it's something that comes with him, just being, still a young player and the guy that's been, so used to being heralded for so long and now finds himself being picked apart a little bit. So he's naturally, kind of a little bit defensive about his one weakness. But, it's something that he does know. We've heard him say it, and it's just something that he needs to embrace.
But isn't it the oddest thing, though, Michael? Like, he shot one random three-pointer in a game against the Lakers. You and I were sitting next to each other and looked at each other like, whoa, and then never again. Like, and it's never really been brought up to him like, hey, why that game? Why that one time? You know what I mean? Like, that's something I would have liked to hear today. Like, you shot 1-3. What was the reason behind that game, and why was that the only one? Like, what was so bad about that shot that you wouldn't – like, it looked good. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't horrible.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, like why not do it again? Why not in a random game when you're playing the Hawks and you're down 15 or when you're up by 30? Why? Like that to me is the most bizarre. It almost gives it like a false story behind it, yet it's not really a false story.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mike. I think, and that's the first step, kind of what Ben was saying in terms of being more aggressive. It's not even a matter of makes or misses. He's so averse to it that it doesn't even – it seems like it doesn't even creep into his mind other than, like you said, that one random game against the Lakers where it almost looked like he was even going to go in. But, yeah, I mean, he has to get to the point where it's, not at the back of his mind to shoot a shot when he's open like that. I don't know why it's, to the point where, like you said, it was that one game where he felt comfortable. And I remember he talked about it afterwards, and he said that he thought, I think LeBron was guarding him, actually, and he was, backed off into the paint, and he said, he was just open, so he thought he would take the look. And he has to get to the point where he's doing that on a consistent basis, and not even all the way out to the three. I mean, just up to the foul line, but opens things up immensely.
Or
for the rest of
even,
the offense.
Michael, even the notion of, hey, we've seen you on video pregame shooting the three. There's some level of success. The ball goes in. It's not like he's missing the backboard or the rim. The ball goes in. He shoots where he'll hit 3, 4, 5 in a row. Why does he have a blockage when the lights go on?
Yeah, I mean, this is I wish I had an answer, but that's, I think that's the thing that they have to get to the bottom of. And I think that wraps back to what we were talking about with Brett in terms of, Brett said that this morning about bending the shot and, if he's 26 and, I think that's kind of the thing that people criticize Brett about a little bit in terms of his, approach to these guys. You don't want to wait until Ben's 26 and 4 years down the road. Who knows, what shape Joel is going to be in at that point. A championship window in the NBA doesn't stay open forever. The Sixers, thanks to, the approach to, asset building, they've have a situation where they have a window that's, opened, and it should be open for a while, but it's not going to be open indefinitely. So I think people want to see Brett kind of put that pressure on Ben to let him know that, like, listen, we're potentially just your jump shot away from being a perennial championship team. I think they want to see a little bit more of that urgency from both of those guys. And we've both been patient too, but going into the third year, I think I would like to see some of that urgency, also.
Michael, it's fair to say, you think Brett coming back is a good decision. You were a guy who was a proponent of the process. Here we are, 7 years now for Brett Brown. Is there fear that the Sixers are turning into what they didn't want to be? This 50-win, perpetual 50-win team that's a good team, but just not great? Or do you see that great team is still, a lot of people like to say they're constantly kicking the can down the road. There's always something. There's always an excuse. People who hate at the process accuse people like you and me of being in this Ponzi scheme, that we've been conned. Is there another level, or are they getting close to becoming what they didn't want to be?
I don't think so, Mike. I think the main difference between potentially becoming what they were prior to the process years and what they have now is, just the present of potential generational talent. When the NBA is a talent league, it's a superstar league. Now, what worries me, of course, is the uncontrollable. We don't know exactly Joel's health or, something like that, Simmons, for the next handful of years in the Eastern Conference. To me, that's not a concern about being a team that's a perennial 50-win team. That's that's the foundation of a team that could be, should be a championship contender. So I think that there's, obviously some of the assets that they've built, which gave people like us the confidence that they were going to be turned into such a juggernaut of a team, has been depleted a bit, which I guess, could be a little bit concerning, especially in terms of, if you look at it in terms of they traded for guys that might not even be back, in terms of, Jimmy and Tobias, things like that. And obviously they missed, on some of the lottery picks, if you want to point at Fultz or Okafor, things that could have made it, even more cushy for the organization. But when you have guys like Joel and Ben, and then still the potential to, surround them with other top talent like Jimmy and Tobias and JJ and these guys, to me, that's, a level above, a middling team that's a 50-win team. That's a team that's a legit championship contender. And I think the Sixers, depending on Joel's health, obviously should be in that, space for the next few years.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, follow him at The Real Mike KB on Twitter as the Sixers season comes to an end. A lot more questions. We never even got into Joel Embiid, really, but I think a lot of people understand. Joel Embiid, they talked about it today. They're going to have a plan. He needs to get in better shape. He acknowledged it. And, something Brett acknowledged, the very popular question of why doesn't he plant his butt down in the post? Well, today, Brett Brown said a lot of that is conditioning and health, that we can't ask him to be down there all game long and expect to get the best Joel Embiid. They acknowledge that. He acknowledges that. They said they sat him down and that he acknowledges that. So we'll see what's next there. We'll have plenty more on the offseason. The draft, there's a 1% chance that the Sixers get the first pick, and we'll see. By the way, let me get your picks. Warriors, Blazers, where are you going?
I got to go with Golden State on that one, Mike, probably in 5 or 6.
Golden State, 5 or 6. Raptors, Bucks.
I'm looking forward to this one. I'm going to go Bucks just because I think the Raptors showed us last series that they depend so heavily on Kawhi to do, so much to them, or I think the Bucks have a little bit more help around Giannis. They're a little bit more of a complete team. I think that one will go 6 or 7, but I'm taking Milwaukee.
You got Bucks in 6 or 7. So I'm the only one so far going Raptors. Got Raptors in 6.
If Kawhi plays like he did against the Sixers, that's probably a good pick.
I think they're a defensive nightmare for the Sixers are a very active team. They pass a lot, whereas the Bucks are very stationary. And I love Toronto's defense, but against a stationary team, not only do they play good defense, they're not going to have to work very hard.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think Milwaukee's going to have to just rely so much on Giannis getting into that, collapsing that defense, getting into the paint. But with Kawhi on him, it's not going to be easy.
By the way, I don't know if you saw Terry Rozier this morning. He was all over ESPN, and he was all over making sure people know that their issues ran deep down there, and he seemingly thought the coach was a big problem. That's what I took from his appearance. How about you?
Yeah, Mike, it sounds something that you and I have been saying, I think, all season about good old Brad Stevens, that he might be, just maybe a little bit overrated by the national media. But, I did see Rozier's comments. And, other than the Sixers offseason, I think Boston's offseason is one that, I'm really going to have my eye on in terms of what they do, because that could be, obviously a major competitor for the Sixers from the next several seasons.
All right, we will talk more Sixers offseason draft and more MKB. He won't go away just because the Sixers are gone. There's plenty to discuss, so we'll have more of MKB here on the Boardwalk on the Hotline. Thank you, man.
All right, Mike.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, like all guests, appear via the Boardwalk on the Hotline.